Most unlikely of villains, schools of pain and forepaws. Does he talk? Does he know how? Does he bottle? Does he meow? Lair of the cerebral bore, ever showing so much more. Release your brains at the
Hey everybody, Jason here. I'm recording this in March of 2022 as we're getting ready to publish the first episode on April 1st. This episode was recorded way back in December of 2021. Can you remember that far back? I sure can't. But this is our first recording effort, so it's a little bit clunky. We talk over each other a little bit, but we do even out in the future episodes. Trust me, I've heard them. So without further ado, I present you the first episode of Cerebrivore. Hello, everybody. We welcome you to our grand experiment. We're going to do a panel discussion inspired by the great podcast across the pond, Purple Worm, now defunct, sadly. I'm Jason. I have the Nerds RPG Variety Podcast. I am the person of least esteem here today. I have three other wonderful podcasters with me. We have Carl Rodriguez, the Geomologist Presents. We have BJ Boyd of The Arcane Alienist. And we have Joe Richter of Hindsightless and the GM of the first ever Pathfinder 2 Actual Play podcast, now unfortunately also defunct, Wheel or Woe. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, doing well, man. Thanks very much.
Great. I think we're both drinking a Youngling.
Yeah, I think two of us are drinking Yingling and two of us are at work. So we won't tell you which two are which.
Yep.
So I'm actually gonna turn over to Joe Richter to lay out, because what we're talking about is a shared setting, and this is an idea that Joe originally broached. So I'm gonna let Joe set the stage.
Sure. So it's certainly not my original idea. I just thought about it one day on the podcast, and it's taken up steam since then. So what I suggested back then was to run a campaign with multiple GMs in the same world, possibly maybe even using different game systems. That was kind of maybe not. But my idea was that people could drop in, drop out whenever, and then that the stories happening would affect everybody else's section of the world. And because I think that would be really fun and neat, where all of a sudden, like, the GMs would have like after action reports basically and be like, okay, here's what happened in my world. Here's where they went, and your world, here's what's going. And it wouldn't be world. I'm saying worlds, but I mean realms, regions, basically, because I'm talking about just one world, one sort of whatever you want, one kingdom, whatever. But yeah, so that was my original thought way back in the day before we all actually started talking about all this. That's when I was just spitballing.
Right. And like you say, this isn't a new idea. We go back, and even the very earliest days of the hobby, this happened. People would take their characters to each other games.
Right.
Dave Hargrave, famous for Ardenwen back California, that California group, this was really famous. They would move around. In fact, Eric Tenkar, if anybody listens to Tenkar, the Tavern Chat on YouTube, he's recently talked about that as well. So has anybody here played in a game like this? I'm just going to go around the room. Carl, have you played in a game like this?
Where you have a shared world with multiple GMs?
Right. But you play the same, the players would play the same character. They would take it to the different GMs games.
Yeah. So on the Audio Dungeon Discord, you can look on there and you find the channel Hex Talk. And that was started by several people. I won't say all their names because I forget who is the GM and what, but they were running, and they're still running, this campaign called Forlorn Shores, and you can muster and play a different character or the same character because they have a central hub, and then go out to the Forlorn Shores and explore. And each GM has their own like section, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, and you could do that. I mean, expanding on on what Joe talked about, you could do that in an already published universe or develop your own universe. To do that, I think it's a pretty neat idea. And then you have people muster and have, or you solicit people to play in that game, and then you run those games, and it could be a different GM anytime, depending, or a GM has a specific day if you want to be more organized.
Right.
But, definitely, it's on the Audio Dungeon Discord, and I believe it's still going.
BJ, have you played in any game like this?
Not in a home group. I've played in RPGA and D&D Encounters, and what's the new? I think I've done one Adventurers League since 5th edition came out, but I don't think that's quite the same as a group of DMs building a world together. Yeah, that's pretty much always been it's set in either Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms, and you just,
right,
go from store to store to club and take your character with you.
Right. And Joe, have you ever had a chance to play in something like this?
No, I haven't, which is why I thought it'd be pretty neat. Because I've never done anything like it. I've heard about it, of course, but never done it. What about you, Jason?
I have. Back in, 2016, 2017, around there, I was in a ICRPG group is a Discord based group that we're doing this exact thing where they had a shared world, and there was like 4 or 5 GMs, and they would say, I'm going to play a game this day, and whoever wants to show up would bring their character and play that day. So it's
you know what, now that I think about it, I have done it once. I started a campaign several years ago, and then after we played for about 6 months, I wanted to play. So another guy he said, okay, we're going to go to this place on the north of the map that nobody's explored, and I'm just going to make it up. And then we swapped out my character for his character, and everybody else kept their own. We just did that for a little bit. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. So the easy way to do it is kind of what I'm sorry, BJ, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's it.
Okay. So the easy way to do it's kind of like what Carl and everybody's laid out here, where you have one world, say Forgotten Realms, and everybody's using D&D 5e as the game system, and bringing their, so all the characters are built using the same ideas. The kind of weird way to do it, maybe not weird, but the more difficult way to do it is what Joe had proposed, you having one shared world. We're all playing in Forgotten Realms, and each GM controls a region or whatever, and you have a shared story, but the GMs are running with different rule sets. And we actually discussed this on the Audio Dungeon at one point too, Carl. I don't know if you were part of that discussion, but Cody and I and Jason Hobbs and Eric, the one that does the Appalachian Adventures and stuff. Eric, is that Jensen? The one, I forget which Eric. I apologize, sir, for not having your name right. I don't have the Discord in front of me. But anyway, a couple of us had kind of talked about doing this over there, where we'd run different systems, but you could transport characters back and forth. But it never got off the ground. So using different systems would be interesting. So if we all use this, say we did this with all the same system, I guess it's just the GMs would agree what kind of magic's out there in the classes and all that beforehand, so there wouldn't be any problems. They wouldn't have a character show up and say, "Oh, you can't have that item." Obviously,
Right.
that'd have to be a gentleman's or general person's agreement where you'd be able to bring whatever your character has and accept what the other DMs have done. If we use different systems, this will be a lot harder.
Yeah,
a lot tougher nut to crack.
You'd have to if someone took a character from their 5e to the 1e guy, then how do you convert that magic item? That'd be a challenge.
Well, or if they go to Rollmaster or to Cipher System, or it's
I feel like it'd be better if you had, because it's Eric Hoffman, by the way. Eric Hoffman is who I think you were thinking about doing the installation.
No, Eric Hoffman's one of the guys involved, but this is different. Eric, this is anyway. Okay. Doesn't matter.
Maybe,
but yeah, Eric Hoffman it does Hex Talk with Jose.
Hex Talk and Forlorn Shores, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
One of the authors of the original Kalmata, actually.
Right.
The Treasure Vaults of Zadabad. So,
yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I think that would be a big challenge. I don't know if that's the best idea, is to run.
Yeah, like I said, that was just something I threw out there, just kind of like, what about this? And thinking about it, it would be pretty tricky.
Yeah, it definitely would
especially
be.
Yeah, and you could be. I mean, you could maybe do like versions of D&D because the
Right.
magic items are kind of compatible. Or you could go, well, like
Everyone
a
could run a different edition of D&D.
right, and right, but you can look up, what does a bag of holding do in 5e versus what does a bag of holding do?
Oh yeah, you could.
Yeah,
You could totally.
right. So you could,
Yep.
right, and I do that all the time with converting monsters to the appropriate system. But then it would be a challenge, and you could even do that with Pathfinder 1, right? I mean, it's 3.
Well, yeah, it's 3.5 and a
But
half.
then you have like the weird thing that they did in Pathfinder 2, where magic items are kind of interesting, right?
Right.
So that'd be more of a challenge. Or I don't even know how Master works.
Yeah, I think maybe the easier way I think maybe the more interesting question is, instead of doing different systems, you pick effectively one system, and then maybe you, instead of all, and you have kind of one setting, but you use either portals or other devices. I'm about to say plot device, but effectively it is a plot device, but you use other methods to let people go to other kinds of other genre games, right? So, and this again goes back to the early days of the hobby. Castle Greyhawk supposedly had portals in there where you could go to Alice in Wonderland and Wizard of Oz and Boot Hill, and you could go to all these far off places, going through a portal and find it, so your D&D characters find themselves in the Old West, things like that. And if we were going to do something like that, you could easily do that. Or if you ran a game, and there are a couple different ways you could do it. You could do portals. You could do a base portal game where it's like Stargate, and you go to the different worlds. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I mean, that may be but just use one base system, but have all the different genres people could explore.
Yeah, I thought, didn't you were on the discussion talk about the portal system, the portal world?
Yeah, that was kind of my initial thought when you guys brought this up, is you kind of take a play like in Planescape, you start with the city of Sigil, which it kind of exists. It's kind of the nexus of all planes and realities, and there are doorways to every place in the multiverse. And so, but you can have a campaign where you're based in Sigil because it's also a city with 0 level characters and merchants, and then they can you can either hop to any of the outer planes, the abyss, or the 9 hells or wherever, but you can also hop to Faerun or
Mystara
or Mystara, wherever. But we just do Planescape, or you could just say, well, we're going to kind of take a page from that, but we're going to invent our own place that's the crossroads of reality, and the worlds are what we define them as being, not necessarily the pre-published or pre-established worlds.
Right.
Create our own cosmology or our own, or it could just be a magical city and it just takes you to different regions of the same world.
Yeah, I mean, I do love me some Lady of Pain though, so please.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Well, think about it. I don't know if they have a 5e version, but you could do multiple versions of and you could, of that from City of Sigil. Or I don't know if people are familiar with the old Grim Jack comic book, but they had Cynosure, which was like a pan-dimensional city at the center-ish of the universe. And, the hero, Grimjack, would go to different worlds, right, to do what Grimjack did. So I think that might be a kind of a cool concept. And then you could both have different worlds and different genres, as well as, different systems, right?
Right. Well, yeah, if the players wanted to, of course, with the different systems, some of that's going to, the question there, and it would have to be decided, is it on the GMs to convert the characters? Or are we trusting the players to convert not trusting, that sounds bad, but Joe would get angry at me for doing the power stance of saying, do we trust the players? But who converts the characters back and forth, right? So that's a question. The other way to do it.
Question.
Yeah, the other way to do it is to do, I was thinking about this. You could do something like the Matrix. You could do a cyberpunk kind of thing where when you jack into the web, each server on the web each domain is kind of, it's its own MMO effectively, right? So you could have all the worlds, all the genres, just when you go in the fantasy area of the internet, it goes by the fantasy rules, right? So, and that would be D&D or Pathfinder or whatever. And it would totally use those rules, and magic would work as far as and everything. And to solve problems, you would have to use the rules of that realm to solve those problems. But effectively, your character's jacked in the internet the whole time, right? So your base character is cyberpunk, but you could go anywhere and do anything when you're jacked in.
So would each player then have like multiple, like if they were going into the cyberpunk world, they'd have a separate character, and then if they were going into the fantasy world,
yeah, you would have your base character, and your like your mental stats would stay the same, right? Like you'd have the same intelligence or whatever across the board, but your physical stats possibly would be different depending where you're jacked in the different worlds. When you go to the it's like you think of the new Jumanji, that kind of thing. It's still their mind, but when the kid goes into the game, now he looks like The Rock, and he's a strong like Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah, so, and you don't even have to do it like you could do it sci-fi-ish, like Matrix,
right.
Or even magical, right? That would be an option, or both. I mean, why the hell not? Right? I mean, sometimes magic is right, or sometimes technology is so advanced that it seems like magic, right? So, that's Arthur C. Clarke, I believe, who paraphrased his.
Well, I know there was a discussion a while back about you could probably make any rule set fit any genre if you want to, but there are certain rule sets that are a lot easier to work for certain genres.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the kind of thing where you could do like a D&D high fantasy and a cyberpunk, actual cyberpunk rules, right. kind of noir Blade Runner, and then you could do Savage Worlds to do a Western.
Well, this is and this is something where maybe you do pick one rule system, and some rule systems are going to be better than others, right? Like Savage Worlds is very.
Like you feel like a universal.
Yeah, something universal. Like, of course, Interlock Unlimited or Rollmaster is the right answer. But actually, they've done
pretty good.
What's that, Joe?
GURPS. I hear GURPS is pretty good for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, if you want to learn it, there are people. GURPS would definitely do the job. So would BRP. So would Hero System actually.
Right.
But now GURPS and Hero is a lot of background. You have a lot of back end work. A lot of work in creating everything.
Yeah, Savage Worlds could work really well too.
Mm-hmm.
That would be like a choice that I might propose or suggest, but people would nowadays say that maybe D&D 5e right?
Does it all.
You could find
supplements.
You could find supplements for. There's a Star Wars supplement. There's a World of Warcraft supplement for 5e. That's some of these are hacks, but they're not official for pay products. But I mean, there's quite a few. There's at least 2 or 3 official or published 5e sci-fi type things, right? That they did with 3.5 or 3.0 with the D20 Modern and all that kind of stuff.
Right. If we didn't want to make people pay for anything, the other option that you mentioned, Star Wars. Of course, there's only one Star Wars game system, and that's the West End. But the D6 system is now out on the open market, and you can get all the supplement. They've got the fantasy and the sci-fi and all that for D6 out there, and D6 is actually a pretty easy system to learn and to use.
Another one is White Box. There's several genres they've expanded for White Box, which is basically the original Swords and Wizardry. So it's OD&D with a few tweaks, but they've got fantasy, they've got science, space opera, they've got a Cthulhu one.
Yeah, I even picked up recently. I picked up a modern mercenary Ghost Ops White Box, which Ghost Recon type stuff that you use. It uses White Box, right? So OS, OD&D OSR. So yeah, that might be a lot of things to ponder.
Yeah, and so like the Portal thing sounds cool and all, but what we miss, at least what I would miss, is our story, the games we run affecting everybody else's game, because they'd all be compartmentalized.
Yeah,
right.
Oh. Well, then that. Go ahead, Jason. I think
I was going to say
an answer to that.
Yeah. Well, I'll go ahead and give your answer. Real quickly, I think that's a great point, though, from Joe, that there's something to be said for being able to use the same character unmodified, other than what's happened to them in each session for the players. And then there would be something satisfying for the GMs to collaborate and bring this world, to do. It'd be a lot of work for the GMs, but I think it'd be really satisfying in the end, knowing that you'd worked together and done all this. But let me throw that back to Carl.
Yeah, so like I feel if you did this Matrix Portal thing, then there should be a meta story,
Right.
That you would have to have some time or downtime in the real world. And how is this affecting the multiverse, right? So as a GM, we would have to come up with like, what's the overall overarching story for it to kind of make sense, so that you're not just playing a series of one shots, but you're playing series of games that are meaningful to the overall story.
Right. You're going into when you go in the fantasy server and you're playing with the Pathfinder rules, you're trying to achieve an objective. You're going in there to get a file. Only in the way that server's configured, the AI is configured that server, that file looks like a treasure chest or whatever, right? So you're going to go in there, you have to get that, but then you have to bring it back, and now you're going to use the cyberpunk rules to do whatever in the quote-unquote real world with it. And then you might have to hop into the, whatever's next. The Star Wars MMO or the Star Wars AI to do the next mission. But yeah, they would all be connected. You would just be going into these different genres, based on how these AIs have configured. It's kind of like if you've seen the Altered Carbon show on Netflix, where you have like the hotel where it's like the Edgar Allan Poe style hotel thing there, that the AI is configured it that way, right? Mm-hmm. So you're kind of interacting with that kind of thing, only on a much larger scale, of course.
Yeah. What do you think about all this craziness, BJ?
I'm sitting there thinking about it's almost be like running a comic book universe. That's kind of the main job of the editor-in-chief at Marvel or DC, and that's kind of Kevin Feige's job at Marvel Studios. Is we've got 20 stories, and I got to make sure that at the minimum, if I run a story in Spider-Man where somebody takes over the Daily Bugle, if they're going to reference the Daily Bugle for the next 6 months in another comic book, I gotta say, hey, JJJ is not the editor-in-chief right now. Reference that when you bring up, the Daily Bugle. Yeah. I think it's the same way if you're doing this as DMs. You just got to compare notes and say, oh yeah, last week the party blew up that building.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the continuity is important. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Nakatomi Tower is gone, guys.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
No. We killed the dragon. You're going to have to come up with another bad guy.
So I guess the question is, we're coming up to about half an hour for an inaugural podcast. That might be a good initial length. I know some of us have a little bit of a time crunch here. Is this something you'd be interested in GMing? Now, the other thing we haven't mentioned, of course, is the option of playing and GMing, although that's more difficult if you're doing that shared story, because you have knowledge that you wouldn't normally have as a player when you're playing in the other people's games. But if we did the cyberpunk thing where they're each like in an AI, then you have less need to know the specifics inside that other realm, right? So even you might know the big overall story, but you don't know how BJ is going to handle it in his Pathfinder world. So when you go in there, you wouldn't know any detail. You might know the overall long game, but you wouldn't really know how that adventure is going to play out. Is this something you'd be interested in GMing and playing in both, Carl?
Yeah, I would say both. I mean, right. So I think the people who contributed to the GM ship, and maybe the meta story can be quite vague. It doesn't have to be codified, and it develops because based on, what happens in the various stories, and we kind of can compare notes. We'd have to set aside time as GMs to compare notes, and I'd love to play in different games in these different GMs. So I think, and I think we're mature enough to not meta anyway, right? And like I said, we don't know what the end game is, which I think would be even more interesting and spontaneous. So I'd run and I'd GM, and I think also people have different expertise in different games, so it'd be cool to for those strengths to shine in a GM and play under that GM, right? So to me,
what do you think, Joe? Is this something you'd be?
Oh, absolutely, man. Totally. I'd want to play and run. Yeah, because like you wouldn't, like Carl was saying, with a vague kind of meta plot and watching it grow and seeing what happens at the table and where that goes from there, like you would know some stuff, but there'd still be plenty of stuff that you wouldn't know. We'd all, like, all the GMs would probably keep a couple secrets from each other for the other people to discover and share some stuff, like the really big stuff. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's workable. I think it'd be super fun. Plus, I love world building. World building with other people is super fun too, because, I get tired of my own shit.
Yeah, definitely. BJ, what do you think?
Yeah, I would definitely want to both GM and play. Same like Joe said. I like world building. I also like the idea that there's some ability to kind of look at the same character concepts across different rule sets or different genres and go, well, what would this character look like in a space opera versus a fantasy versus a Western or something like that. But I think we all have to agree to we have to make a pact among the GMs we're not going to Last Jedi it, where we just veer something off a cliff in a direction where there's no coming back. 3 GMs set up this kind of unvoid meta plot, and then you just go, I don't want to do that.
My players, they opened up a singularity. They opened up a singularity and swallowed the universe. So game over. Yeah, right. None of that stuff.
Yeah.
How about you, Jason?
Oh, well, yeah, I'd be interested in doing both, without a doubt. I think I think this is the kind of thing that from here, the next decision to make, and maybe it's the next show, is depending what we want to do, but potentially for the next show, you could talk. I know we talked about doing a panel discussion on pantheons and the way religion works in the world. So maybe we could talk about that, because that could affect, depending what this game is like, that might affect the game. Now, if we did the cyberpunk thing, it might not affect it at all. But if we did something fantasy with portals, then obviously deities and pantheons and gods would matter a whole lot.
Yeah.
So that'd be an interesting discussion. I guess the other thing just for us to be thinking about and to discuss maybe off the air a little bit would be maybe come back next time with ideas what system and we would want to use as the core system to think about.
And maybe some callers could call in too and tell us that we're insane or whatever they think.
And it would never work or
Yeah,
or recommendation experiences callers have had doing this before.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, or system recommendations or anything.
Or just callers call in to talk about how handsome BJ is.
I know, at the top.
Because goddamn, man, distinguished looking chap.
All done up with the
just
tie.
The tie. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Take this off, and I look like a Neanderthal.
Everybody's wanting the YouTube version of this podcast now.
This is a random thought, but when you start talking about cyberpunk, I start thinking about Snow Crash and Ready Player One. And I imagine trying to play a cleric in a virtual reality setting, and the rules there's some kind of AI timer in the thing that kind of, you're trying to play a cleric. It's like every so very often you get a little pop-up warning. You have not proselytized anybody. You can't do anything. Your powers are gone. You stop.
You could do that kind of stuff, right?
Well, that's funny to me because increasingly I think people play clerics more like they're just kind of a weird kind of magic user, not.
Yeah,
I really would love to explore like fourth wall type of things like that, honestly. And I would be great to not. I mean, I don't know. I guess we could also discuss next time if we're gonna do like a published property or make our own thing. I think it'd be more exciting to make our own thing.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I would definitely
the real world and the virtual world, right? It's kind of, it'd be like a virtual like Westworld type of thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and there have been and let's be honest. I mean, in the RPG world, there's no new ideas, right?
Right.
So there are games out there that kind of do this, but we would be making it our own. So this isn't really a new idea. It's a pretty old one as far as RPGs go, but I think it's interesting. So of course the biggest problem is potentially finding the players. So we don't just have 3 players in each game, the other GMs. But we need to recruit a steady pool of actual players as well.
I'd be willing to bet between the four of us, we could wrestle up some players.
Yeah, I mean, and definitely if we emphasize drop in, drop out, you can come and taste a bit of the magic that we're creating, but maybe you want to stay, maybe you won't, maybe it's not for you. And you got to give the players that choice, but make it open, right? So that's why I think like a central hub, or like you jack out at the end of the adventure, however, or to do it would be the best thing, right? So it is conducive to that drop in, drop out, less marches type of style. Though it's like marches are the universe.
Well, and that's the advantage of the cyberpunk thing, because you could easily, at the end of the adventure, whether you're at the stop point or not, you could potentially get jacked out of the computer, right? So
but
but
a timer, yeah,
but you could do it that way. Yeah, well, there you go. That's perfect. You can only be logged into the internet for so long, and that pulls you out automatically, right?
That's a great paradigm already. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, if you guys, it's almost like if you were like in a tournament, right, at a convention, right?
Yeah, you do an X crawl kind of thing.
X crawl, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with that
tournament module. It's like we're gonna run Tomb of Horrors. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Good luck. You'll be jacking in and out of. Keep putting quarters in for that one.
Right. We'll do Gauntlet the video. We'll do Gauntlet the RPG like BJ talked about.
Yeah, man.
No, that wasn't BJ. I apologize, BJ. That was Brian. That was Brian over, and I have to look that up. Was talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, any last thoughts, guys? Carl?
No, I think we have a lot to think about. This, I think, is a great idea. We can, all these little one shots that we have in our wheelhouse, we could think to run, and how do they fit in, and what little seed would we contribute to the meta plot. And it'd be great to discuss like what the meta plot might be for our multiverse universe shared world.
Joe?
Yeah, totally. And it wouldn't, we've talked about it being in the cyberpunk and jacking in and out of the internet, but it doesn't necessarily even have to be. It could be fantasy and you just walk into like different gateways and shit. But that whole idea, yeah, man, I'm curious to see where this goes.
What do you think, BJ?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think it'd be a lot of fun to, you have to line out some sort of guideposts for all of us to kind of stick with, so that there's a little consistency. But then, it would be fun to kind of like jazz. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing, but still make it somehow sync up.
Definitely, yeah. And like Joe was talking about, you could do a fantasy version of this where you take a potion to go to the other dimension, and you only can. The potion wears off after 3 hours or whatever. So you could get the same effect to pull people back to the city. The question is, the advantage of the cyberpunk thing is, and the setting could be anything any of us could imagine now with the knowledge we have now. Where if you're doing a fantasy setting, would they have the imagination to imagine, cyberpunk red is the setting, right? Or those kind of sci-fi things. Where if you do it today, obviously anything we can think of is fair game.
Because the other thing you could do is you could kind of a Matrix Westworld, what is real, where like you have a space opera setting where this is like a holodeck simulation, and you have a kind of postmodern cyberpunk, and then you have a fantasy where this is all some sort of we hold the crystal or we take the potion, and nobody knows which one is the real answer. That's
that's fun,
right? This is like a simulation, but we don't know which simulation we're in because we were born here.
Yeah,
yeah. Like Matrix would be totally cool with that, right? So who knows what the real thing is? Or another idea is like if magic and technology are so similar because it's unexplainable, kind of like a Numenera type verse, right? Where it can be magic or it can be technology. The people in the world don't know. Right.
It's well, that takes you to.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that was my.
Yeah.
It's vague whether it's magic or technology because it's so. Right. Out there.
Yeah. Well, of course, that would take you to. You could do your metamorphosis alpha thing, right? Easily enough. You're on the
you're on a lost starship or Dyson sphere or something, and things have gone wrong, but you grew up there. Anyway, we're getting in the weeds here. But thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate you're willing to take part in this.
Yeah.
You
Cool.
guys
Now we
wanna
got to come up with a cool name.
Yeah. Do you want to plug anything before we leave, Carl?
No, I think you're going to put it all in the notes. You're good like that.
Oh, okay. BJ, you want to plug anything?
Go listen to my episode about elves, everybody.
Yeah, it's a very good episode.
No, only I've listened to it so far. Nobody else
No,
cares.
it's not true.
Joe,
It got a typical number of listenings for an episode, but usually I get about at least Daniel and Carl and Jason always call in about everything. So Jason was the only caller, and I'm like, well, did I just shock everybody into silence, or?
I explained why I didn't call.
Right, yeah.
Joe, did you have anything you want to plug?
Go watch Sex Education on Netflix. It rules.
Oh, you pissed off yet on season 3?
I hate season 3. I love it. I love it to pieces, and I hate it.
And Wheel of Time.
Yeah, I'm all done.
I was started watching Wheel of Time, and I thought I need to read that. I never read the book.
Oh wow!
So
they're two totally separate things. You don't need to do one or the other. Trust me.
I'll listen to the book for about 5 chapters, and I'll watch an episode.
Yeah. All right.
Excellent. Okay. Well,
Jason, you got anything to plug?
No, just go listen to all these folks' shows. That's
find yourself some good barbecue wherever you're at. That's what I say.
There you go. Definitely.
Close us out.
Okay, folks. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to reach out and give us any comments, you can leave a message on the Anchor app. You can send an email to cerebrivore@gmail.com. That is in the show notes. So you go to the webpage, there's a way that's linked in the show notes. There's a way to send an email. Otherwise, it's the show title @gmail.com. You can also find us on a variety of Discords, primarily the Audio Dungeon Discord. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on what we've talked about this episode, or just in general. The plan, folks, is we're going to do bi-weekly episodes every 2 weeks. On Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, we're going to drop an episode. If we get phone calls and we have other things, those are going to be bonus episodes, and those will be dropped the opposite weeks. So that is our plan going forward. I want to this is going to be a rotating panel of podcasters, so people will come and go. It's not always going to be the same voices on the episodes, but the podcasters, or the people, they may not even be podcasters, but the guests on the panel will be listed in the show notes with ways to get in touch with them. We do record these episodes. Once we get in the flow, they'll probably be recorded about a month in advance. We had recorded we wanted 4 episodes before we dropped the first one. So a couple of these episodes are a little bit older, but once we're caught up, there'll be about a month lag between the episode and when it's played on the air. I want to thank all my panel members in this episode. I want to thank Ray Otis of Plundergrounds, who provided us the wonderful cover art for our show. And I thank the amazing TJ Drennan for the wonderful intro and outro music he has provided for the show. And with that, I'm just going to let TJ play us out. Talk to you soon, folks.
A Nerd Central broadcast, Cerebral podcast. Let's savor all the flavors from the Simon Hemstrom. The All-Stars and Pods past, Cerebral podcast. You're counting down your last as you admire them all. The sound is playing teeth. Escaping the brain, what I mean is this machine's a fake, and from what I understand, that's an don't look now, this people is coming, and all that's left is the crowd and the running. You can bring it, we can pile, think above in any order, just another brain of people tossers running for the border, just a snack like a one caster, be an MP. Respected buzz, you can eat on a biggie, and his toasters never say it. It's savoring the flavor of the movies it created.
Perfect.
So,
Awesome, dudes. That was
Great.
fun.
Yep.
We'll
That's
do this
good.
again. Sorry to bail so fast, but I'm still.
Oh no, it's good.
No,
It's
you're
good to
good,
keep
Joe.
them short. We could.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can ramble on for
All right. Later,
Yeah.
dudes.
a long time.
Okay, take care,
later.
Joe.
Take care.